The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty compound as Lieutenant Sarah Falcon Martinez adjusted her tactical gear one final time. She had earned that call sign during her first deployment when her sharp eyes spotted enemy movement from impossible distances, like a falcon circling high above its prey. Now, 3 years later, she was the only female member of an elite SEAL reconnaissance unit operating deep in hostile territory. The mission briefing had been straightforward enough. Intelligence suggested a high-value target was hiding in a remote village 40 clicks northeast of their current position. What made this operation different was the unusual radio chatter they had been intercepting for the past week. Someone in that village was transmitting coded messages using an old frequency that hadn't been active since World War II. Commander Jake "Thunder" Rodriguez gathered his team around the makeshift table where satellite images were spread like pieces of a deadly puzzle. Sarah studied the photos with the intensity that had made her legendary among her peers. While the other SEALs focused on tactical entry points and escape routes, her attention was drawn to something else entirely. In the corner of one photograph, barely visible among the shadows of an old stone building, was a marking that made her heart race. The symbol was faint, weathered by decades of harsh mountain weather, but unmistakable to someone who had spent countless hours studying historical military insignia. It was the emblem of the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, the most decorated unit in United States military history, but that unit had been disbanded over 70 years ago. Composed entirely of Japanese-American soldiers who had fought with extraordinary courage during the Second World War. Sarah's mind raced as she connected fragments of information that had been nagging at her for days. The radio frequency, the remote location, the presence of that symbol, in a place where it had no business being. She thought about her own grandfather, who had served with distinction in the Pacific Theater and had told her stories about brave soldiers who had been forgotten by history. As the team prepared to move out under cover of darkness, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. Instead of simply following orders, she began to piece together a mystery that had been buried for generations. The coded transmissions weren't random enemy communications. They were something far more significant. Something that could rewrite the understanding of courage and sacrifice in ways the military had never imagined. The helicopter ride to the insertion point was tense and silent. Each SEAL was lost in their own pre-mission ritual, checking equipment and running through contingency plans. Sarah's ritual was different. She carried a small, worn photograph in her breast pocket, a picture of her grandfather standing with his unit before their final mission in the Philippines. He had been killed 3 days before the war ended, never knowing that his sacrifice would inspire his granddaughter to follow in his footsteps. Thunder's voice crackled through their headsets as they approached the drop zone. The mountains below looked like jagged teeth against the starlit sky, ancient and unforgiving. Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came before every mission, but tonight there was something else. An instinct that told her they were about to uncover something that would shake the very foundations of everything they thought they knew about honor and duty. The team inserted silently, their boots touching the rocky ground with practiced precision. They moved like ghosts through the darkness, following a route that Sarah had memorized from the satellite images. But as they approached the village, she began to notice things that weren't in any intelligence report. Fresh tire tracks leading to an abandoned mine shaft, solar panels hidden under camouflage netting, and most disturbing of all, the complete absence of any electronic signatures that should have been present in an active enemy compound. Thunder held up his fist, signaling the team to halt. Through their night vision goggles, they could see the village spread out below them, like a collection of dark boxes against the mountainside. But something was wrong. There were no guards, no movement, no signs of the hostile activity that had brought them here. The place looked abandoned, forgotten by time and war. Sarah studied the scene with growing unease. In her experience, empty villages in combat zones meant one of two things. Either the enemy had been warned of their approach, or they were walking into a trap that had been years in the making. As she watched, a light flickered briefly in one of the stone buildings. The same building where she had spotted the military insignia in the satellite photograph. The radio frequency that had brought them here suddenly came to life in her earpiece. But instead of the coded enemy transmissions they expected, what they heard was something that made every member of the team freeze in place. It was an old song, barely audible through the static, being hummed by someone with a voice weathered by age and hardship. Sarah recognized the melody immediately. It was Sukiyaki, a Japanese song that had become popular among American troops during the war. Thunder's eyes met Sarah's through their night vision, and she could see the same confusion and growing realization that was building in her own mind. This wasn't an enemy stronghold. This wasn't a trap or an ambush waiting to happen. They had stumbled onto something far more complex and emotionally charged than any of them had been prepared for. As they crept closer to the village, Sarah's training kicked in, but her heart was racing for reasons that had nothing to do with combat readiness. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place in ways that made her question everything she thought she knew about the war, about honor, and about the secrets that nations keep buried in remote places, where no one expects them to be found. The building with the flickering light was larger than the others, constructed of stone that had been quarried locally, but arranged with the precision that spoke of military engineering. As they approached, Sarah could make out more details that confirmed her growing suspicions. The windows were positioned for maximum defensive capability. The roof was designed to withstand artillery bombardment, and carved into the lintel above the main door, so faint it was almost invisible, was a date. The 15th of August 1945. That was the day Japan had surrendered, ending World War II. But what was a building constructed with American military precision doing in this remote location, marked with that specific date, and decorated with the insignia of a unit that had been officially disbanded decades ago? Sarah's grandfather had died on the 12th of August 1945, just 3 days before the war ended. The connection couldn't be coincidence. Thunder made the hand signal for the team to hold position while he and Sarah moved forward to investigate. Their boots made no sound on the ancient stone as they approached the building. Through a crack in one of the windows, Sarah could see the source of the flickering light. It was an old man, probably in his 90s, sitting at a radio that looked like it belonged in a museum. His fingers moved across the controls with practiced precision, and beside him, on a wooden table, was a collection of photographs and documents that made Sarah's blood run cold. They were military photographs, showing American soldiers in various locations across the Pacific Theater. But these weren't standard unit photos. These were pictures of operations that had never been officially acknowledged. Missions that had been classified so deeply that they had been erased from official military history. And at the center of each photograph was the same symbol that Sarah had spotted in the satellite images: the emblem of the 442nd Regimental Combat Team. The old man suddenly looked up from his radio, as if sensing their presence despite their careful approach. For a moment that stretched into eternity, his eyes met Sarah's through the window. There was no fear in his expression, no surprise at finding armed soldiers outside his remote hideaway. Instead, there was something that looked almost like relief, as if he had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. Thunder's voice came through Sarah's earpiece in a whisper so quiet it was barely audible. "We need to call this in. This isn't what we were briefed for." But Sarah was already moving toward the door, driven by an instinct that told her they were moments away from uncovering something that would change everything they thought they knew about courage, sacrifice, and the price of keeping secrets that were too dangerous for the world to know. The heavy wooden door opened before Sarah could knock, revealing the old man who had been watching them approach. Up close, his face told the story of decades spent in this remote mountain hideaway, weathered by altitude and solitude but alert with intelligence that age had not dimmed. He wore simple clothes that might have belonged to any mountain villager. But Sarah's trained eye caught details that others would miss. His posture was military straight, despite his advanced years. His eyes swept their tactical positions with the automatic assessment of someone who had survived combat. And most telling of all, he showed no surprise at finding heavily armed American soldiers at his door in the middle of the night. "I have been waiting for you," he said in English that carried only the faintest trace of an accent. "Though I expected you would come much sooner. My name is Hiroshi Tanaka, Sergeant First Class, 442nd Regimental Combat Team. Retired, obviously. His slight smile held decades of sadness and hope in equal measure. Please come in. We have much to discuss before morning comes. Thunder exchanged glances with Sarah, both thinking the same thing. Their mission parameters had just become meaningless. This wasn't an enemy combatant or a high-value target. This was a piece of living history that officially didn't exist, standing in a place that wasn't supposed to be on any map, holding secrets that could rewrite military records going back 70 years. The interior of the building was a museum that no one was ever supposed to see. The walls were covered with photographs, maps, and documents that detailed operations Sarah had never heard of despite her extensive military education. There were pictures of American soldiers working alongside local resistance fighters in locations across Southeast Asia, intelligence reports written in multiple languages and stamped with classifications so high that most of them had been invented specifically for these missions. And everywhere, the emblem of the 442nd, the unit that was supposed to have been disbanded when the war ended. Hiroshi moved to the radio equipment with steps that spoke of 70 years of the same routine. I broadcast on the old frequency every night at this time, he explained as he began shutting down the ancient equipment. Partly to maintain contact with the others, partly in hope that someday, the right people would hear and understand what it means. Tonight, finally, someone did. Sarah found herself drawn to a particular section of the wall, where a large map of the Pacific Theater was marked with red pins in locations that didn't match any official military history she knew. Sergeant Tanaka, she said, using his rank despite the decades that had passed. What is this place? What were you doing here? The old soldier's eyes grew distant as he looked at the map. After the war officially ended, some of us were asked to remain in service for operations that could never be acknowledged. The world believed that the 15th of August 1945 marked the end of all combat in the Pacific. But there were still enemy holdouts scattered across dozens of remote locations. Some with access to weapons that could have destabilized the entire region if they had fallen into the wrong hands. Thunder stepped forward, his tactical training warring with his growing fascination for the story unfolding before them. You're saying the 442nd continued operating after the war ended? Hiroshi nodded slowly. A small unit. Volunteers only. Men who had already sacrificed everything for America and were willing to sacrifice even more. We operated without official support, without recognition, without the possibility of ever returning to normal lives. Our families were told we had died in the final days of fighting. Our names were removed from all records. We became ghosts, fighting a war that history would never acknowledge. Sarah felt pieces of a massive puzzle clicking into place. The radio transmissions we've been intercepting. You've been coordinating with other sites like this one. None. 7 of us remain, Hiroshi confirmed. Scattered across locations from here to the Philippines. We have maintained our posts for 70 years, guarding secrets and monitoring threats that the official military could never publicly acknowledge. But we are old now, and the world has changed in ways we could never have imagined. When we first accepted this assignment, the implications of what they were hearing began to sink in. These weren't enemy transmissions that had brought the SEAL team to this location. They were communications between the last survivors of a unit that had been sacrificing everything for America for 7 decades, operating entirely outside official channels, protecting secrets that could still destabilize entire regions if they were revealed carelessly. Thunder activated his communication gear to contact their base, but Hiroshi held up a weathered hand. Before you report what you have found here, there is something you must understand. In this building, in the others like it scattered across these mountains, we have been guarding more than just old secrets. 3 days from now, on August 15th, exactly 70 years after we first accepted this assignment, our mission will finally be complete. Sarah's mind raced. August 15th was in 3 days, and intelligence had been reporting unusual activity in this region for exactly that period. What happens in 3 days? 7 henses. Hiroshi moved to a locked cabinet that had clearly not been opened in years. Inside were documents sealed in protective cases, along with several items that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. Among them was a Congressional Medal of Honor. Never presented, because the recipient was officially listed as killed in action. Beside it was a letter bearing the seal of the President of the United States, dated the 18th of August 1945, authorizing operations that had never been acknowledged by any subsequent administration. Every secret we have protected, every sacrifice we have made, every day we have spent in isolation, was building toward this moment, Hiroshi explained. In 3 days, we will transmit the final coordinates to the Pentagon. Locations of weapons caches, intelligence networks, and strategic resources that have been hidden since the war ended. Information that will finally allow the last shadows of World War II to be laid to rest. Thunder lowered his communication gear, the weight of what they had discovered settling over the entire team. Why now? Why after 70 years? Hiroshi's smile was sad but determined. Because we are the last. When we are gone, these secrets die with us, unless we find a way to pass them on to people who will understand their significance. We have spent 70 years waiting for the right moment, the right people, the right circumstances to emerge. Tonight, when I saw you approaching with the same determination and courage that drove us to accept this mission so long ago, I knew that moment had finally arrived. Sarah looked around the room with new understanding. Every photograph, every document, every carefully preserved piece of equipment represented decades of sacrifice by people who had voluntarily erased themselves from history in service of something larger than individual recognition. They had spent their entire adult lives in isolation, maintaining a vigil that no one knew existed, protecting secrets that could still impact global security. There's something else, Hiroshi continued, reaching for a specific photograph among the hundreds that covered the walls. Your grandfather, Sergeant Miguel Martinez, of the 442nd. He didn't die in the Philippines as the official records indicate. He was one of the original volunteers for this extended mission. He spent 5 years at a post similar to this one before a landmine claimed his life in 1950. He left something for his family, in case they ever found their way here. The world seemed to stop spinning as Hiroshi handed Sarah a letter that bore her grandfather's handwriting, addressed simply to, "My granddaughter, if she chooses to serve." Inside were words that spoke across the decades about honor, duty, and the price of protecting things that were bigger than any individual life. Thunder's voice came from somewhere far away. "Falcon, we need to make a decision here. This changes everything about our mission." Sarah looked up from her grandfather's letter, understanding finally why she had felt drawn to military service, why she had pushed herself to excel in ways that sometimes surprised even her, why she had developed instincts that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than training. She was connected to this place, these people, this ongoing mission in ways that went far beyond coincidence. "In 3 days, when we transmit the final coordinates," Hiroshi said quietly, "this phase of our service will end. But the information we release will create new responsibilities, new missions, new secrets that will need to be protected by people who understand the weight of what they carry. We have been hoping that the right people would find us when the time came to pass that responsibility to a new generation." The radio equipment suddenly crackled to life with an incoming transmission. It was one of the other sites, reporting unusual activity in their sector, military vehicles moving toward their position, satellite surveillance increasing, signs that their 70 years of careful concealment might finally be compromised. The timing couldn't be coincidental. Someone else knew about the August 15th deadline and was moving to intercept whatever the old soldiers planned to reveal. Sarah felt the weight of destiny settling around her shoulders like a tactical vest. In the next 72 hours, decisions would be made that could either honor 7 decades of sacrifice or waste it completely. The SEALs had come here hunting enemies, and instead had found heroes who had been protecting America longer than any of them had been alive. Now they faced a choice that would determine whether that protection could continue for another generation. The transmission from the other site had changed everything. Sarah watched Hiroshi's weathered hands move across the radio controls, with urgent precision, as he attempted to re-establish contact with his fellow guardians. Static filled the room, broken only by fragments of voices reporting enemy movement and requests for immediate extraction. After 70 years of perfect operational security, their network was under attack, with just 3 days remaining until their mission's completion. Thunder was already coordinating with their base, requesting immediate satellite surveillance of the entire region. The intelligence picture that emerged was sobering. At least 6 different locations were experiencing increased military activity, all of them positioned near sites that corresponded to the red pins on Hiroshi's map. Someone with significant resources and detailed knowledge of the 442nd's extended operations was moving to prevent the planned August 15th transmission. "Who knows about your mission?" Sarah asked Hiroshi, as he continued his attempts to reach the other sites. After 70 years of secrecy, how could anyone have this level of operational detail? Hiroshi's expression grew grim as he shut down the radio equipment. There were originally 23 of us who accepted the extended mission. Over the decades, some died from natural causes. Others were lost to accidents or enemy action. But 3 of our number disappeared under circumstances that we could never adequately explain. Their bodies were never found. Their posts were discovered empty, with no signs of struggle. We always feared they might have been captured rather than killed. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. If members of the original unit had been compromised and forced to reveal operational details, then every aspect of the 70-year mission could have been under enemy observation for decades. The timing of the current attack wasn't coincidental. Someone had been waiting for the planned conclusion of their mission, positioning assets to intercept or destroy the intelligence that the old soldiers intended to transmit. Thunder finished his communication with their command post and rejoined the discussion. Satellite imagery shows military convoys approaching at least 4 of the sites simultaneously. These aren't local militias or opportunistic raiders. The equipment signatures suggest this is a coordinated operation by forces with access to advanced intelligence and significant logistical support. Sarah studied the map again, noting the strategic positioning of each marked location. They're not just trying to stop the transmission. They're attempting to capture the entire network intact. All the intelligence, all the secret weapons caches, everything your unit has been protecting for 70 years. Hiroshi moved to the locked cabinet and began removing additional materials that Sarah hadn't seen before. Among them were detailed technical specifications for weapon systems that had been classified beyond anything she had clearance to view. "What we have been guarding is more significant than strategic intelligence or hidden weapons," he explained. During the final months of the war, both sides developed technologies that were far ahead of their time. Some of these innovations were buried because the world was not ready for them. Others were concealed because they were too dangerous to trust to any single nation. Thunder examined one of the technical documents, his face growing pale as he recognized implications that went far beyond conventional military concerns. "This is nuclear technology, but not like anything I've seen in contemporary arsenals. Some of these designs look like they could be decades ahead of current capabilities. The scientists who developed these systems scattered them across secure locations when the war ended," Hiroshi continued. "Each of our posts guards one piece of technologies that would be devastating if they were ever assembled and deployed. Individually, the components are merely interesting historical artifacts. Together, they could destabilize global military balance in ways that would make current nuclear arsenals seem primitive." Sarah felt the true scope of the situation crystallizing around her. For 70 years, the survivors of the 442nd had been guarding not just military secrets, but potentially world-changing technologies that had been deliberately scattered to prevent any single entity from possessing complete systems. The August 15th transmission wasn't just about revealing historical truths. It was about transferring custody of weapons that could reshape modern warfare. The radio crackled back to life with a transmission that made everyone in the room freeze. It was a voice speaking in English with an American accent, but the words were clearly directed at anyone monitoring the frequency. "This is Colonel Harrison, United States Army Intelligence. To any personnel currently occupying the designated sites, you are ordered to cease all communications and await extraction. Failure to comply will result in immediate military action. Hiroshi's face showed recognition mixed with betrayal. James Harrison was one of the three who disappeared. We assumed he had been killed in 1967 during a reconnaissance mission that went wrong. If he's alive and working with whoever is conducting this operation, then they have access to every detail of our mission structure. Thunder was already calculating tactical options. We need to evacuate immediately. If Harrison knows the specifics of this site, then enemy forces are probably already positioning for assault. How long would it take to download all the critical intelligence? The information cannot be simply downloaded, Hiroshi replied. Each piece is encrypted using methods that require specific physical keys maintained at each site. The transmission planned for August 15th was designed to require simultaneous input from all remaining posts. If any significant number of sites are compromised, the entire network becomes inaccessible. Sarah realized they were facing a decision that went far beyond their original mission parameters. They could extract Hiroshi and attempt to preserve whatever intelligence he could carry, effectively abandoning the complete intelligence network that had been maintained for 7 decades. Alternatively, they could attempt to defend the site and help execute the planned transmission, risking not just their own lives but potentially allowing world-changing technologies to fall into unknown hands if they failed. The sound of helicopter rotors in the distance made the decision immediate and urgent. Sarah moved to the window and confirmed her worst fears. Multiple aircraft were approaching from different directions, their flight patterns indicating a coordinated assault designed to prevent escape, while overwhelming any defensive capabilities the site might possess. There's a third option, Hiroshi said quietly. The protocols we established 70 years ago included provisions for preventing the intelligence from being captured if our positions became untenable. Each site is equipped with thermite charges sufficient to destroy all materials and equipment. If we cannot complete the mission, we can ensure that the secrets remain secret. Thunder shook his head. That means 70 years of sacrifice becomes meaningless. Everything your unit protected just disappears forever. Not everything, Sarah said, understanding suddenly flooding through her. She pulled out her grandfather's letter and pointed to a passage she had initially dismissed as sentimental. He wrote about backup protocols, secondary sites that weren't part of the primary network, places where copies of the most critical intelligence could be hidden if the main operation was ever compromised. Hiroshi looked at the letter with growing excitement. Miguel was always the strategic thinker among us. If he established backup sites, then the mission could still be completed even if the primary network is captured or destroyed. But we would need access to information that only he possessed, and he died 50 years ago. Sarah studied her grandfather's letter more carefully, noting details that had seemed like personal references but might actually be coded instructions. He mentioned specific locations, dates, and family stories that never made sense to me before. What if these aren't just memories? What if they're directions to the backup sites? The helicopter sounds were getting closer, and Thunder was monitoring communications that indicated ground forces were also approaching their position. They had minutes at most before the site would be under direct assault. Any decision about how to proceed had to be made immediately. Hiroshi moved to the thermite charges, his hand hovering over the activation switch. If you believe your grandfather established backup protocols, then preserving this site may not be necessary. We can destroy the primary intelligence to prevent capture, while using his information to complete the mission through alternative means. Sarah felt the weight of 7 decades of sacrifice pressing down on her shoulders. In the next few minutes, she would need to make decisions that could either honor her grandfather's legacy or destroy it forever. The approaching enemy forces meant that inaction was not an option. Whatever choice she made would determine whether the 440 seconds extended mission ended in triumph or tragedy. Thunder's voice cut through her thoughts with urgent intensity. Falcon, we need to move now. Those helicopters are setting up for assault positions, and I'm reading multiple ground units converging on our location. Whatever we're going to do, it has to happen in the next 60 seconds. Sarah looked at the room full of artifacts that represented decades of hidden sacrifice. Then, at the letter from her grandfather that might contain the key to completing a mission that had started before she was born. The helicopters outside were settling into positions that would allow suppressing fire, while ground forces moved in for capture rather than destruction. That confirmed her suspicions about enemy intentions. They wanted the intelligence intact, which meant the thermite charges were the only thing standing between world-changing secrets and unknown hostile forces. Destroy the site, she told Hiroshi. But first, help me decode my grandfather's letter. If he really established backup protocols, then we can complete the mission and honor everyone who has been protecting these secrets for 70 years. Hiroshi's finger moved toward the activation switch, while Sarah spread her grandfather's letter on the table between them. Outside, the sound of fast roping operations indicated that enemy forces were beginning their assault. In moments, the door would be breached, and the longest-running secret mission in American military history would either reach its intended conclusion or end in catastrophic failure. As the first explosions echoed through the building and enemy voices could be heard in the corridor outside, Sarah finally understood why she had felt drawn to this place. This mission. This moment. Her grandfather's sacrifice hadn't ended with his death 50 years ago. It had been building toward this night, when his granddaughter would have the opportunity to complete what he had started and ensure that 7 decades of hidden service would not have been in vain. The thermite charges activated with a brilliant flash that could be seen for miles across the mountain valleys, marking the end of one phase of the 440 seconds extended mission and the beginning of another that would test whether honor and duty could survive even when the world forgot they had ever existed.